This is the most disputed real estate on planet Earth. For 3,000 years, everyone from the Romans to the British to the Babylonians has looked at this tiny strip of desert and said, today, if you ask who owns this land, you don't get a history lesson. You get a screaming match, you get protests, you get rockets. But to understand the madness on the news today, we have to go back. Before the rockets, before the walls, before the British ruined everything with a pen, who actually has the right to live here? Let's ask history. But be warned, history is drunk. Let's speedrun the first few thousand years. In the blue corner, we have the Jews. According to the Torah, God basically gave the land of Canaan to Abraham and his descendants. It was a divine real estate contract. The Jews established kingdoms here. King David, King Solomon. They built the first temple. Jerusalem was their capital. This is the bedrock of the Jewish claim. We were here, we built a kingdom, and we have the archaeology to prove it. But then, history happened. The Assyrians came. Then the Babylonians. They destroyed the temple and kicked the Jews out. Then the Jews came back. Then the Romans came. And the Romans really didn't like rebellion. That's actually true. The Romans renamed the region Palestine partly to spite the Jews. Most Jews were exiled, the diaspora, scattering to Europe and the Middle East. But, and this is important, there was always a small Jewish presence remaining. They never fully left. Fast forward, the Romans fall. The Byzantines take over. Then in the 7th century, the Arabs arrive with a new religion, Islam. They build the Dome of the Rock right on top of where the Jewish temple used to be. For the next 1,300 years, the land is mostly ruled by Muslim empires, with a brief, bloody cameo by the Crusaders. By the 19th century, the land is under the Ottoman Empire. The population is mostly Arab Muslims and Christians, who have lived there for centuries. They call themselves Palestinians. Their claim is simple. We have been living here, farming this land, and raising our families for over 1,000 years. This is our home. So, Jews say, we were here first, and we were kicked out. Arabs say, we've been here for centuries, and we live here now. Both are technically true. And for a while, under the Ottomans, it was relatively quiet, until the 20th century showed up. World War I. The British Empire is fighting the Ottoman Empire. Britain wants to win, badly. And to win, they need friends. So, they decide to use their favorite diplomatic tactic, lying. This was the Nakba Hussein Correspondence, 1915. The Arabs kept their end of the bargain. They revolted, think Lawrence of Arabia. But at the exact same time, Britain was talking to the Zionists. Zionism was growing in Europe because, frankly, Europe was a terrible place to be Jewish. Pogroms, persecution. They needed a safe haven. They looked at the map and said, let's go home. Britain wanted support from the Jewish community. So in 1917, the British Foreign Secretary, Arthur Balfour, wrote a letter, the Balfour Declaration. It viewed with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. So Britain promised the land to the Arabs, promised a home to the Jews, and secretly planned to keep it for themselves. In 1918, the Ottomans collapsed. Britain took control. They called it the British Mandate. And suddenly, the two promises crashed into each other. Jewish immigrants started arriving in larger numbers, fleeing persecution in Europe. They bought land legally from absentee Arab landlords. They drained swamps. They built kibbutzim. The local Arabs looked around and said, wait a minute, you're building a state on our land? But the British promised us independence. Riots started. 1920, 1929, 1936. Arabs attacked Jews. Jews formed militias, the Haganah, and fought back. Britain was stuck in the middle, acting like a substitute teacher who has lost control of the class. And then, the darkest chapter in human history occurred in Europe, the Holocaust. 6 million Jews were murdered by the Nazis. After World War II, the sympathy for a Jewish state was immense. The survivors had nowhere to go. They tried to reach Palestine. The Arabs argued, what happened in Europe is a tragedy, but why should we pay the price for European crimes with our land? The violence in Palestine became uncontrollable. Jewish paramilitary groups, like the Irgun, started attacking the British to force them out. Finally, in 1947, Britain looked at the mess they helped create, looked at their watch and said, Britain left. And the United Nations stepped up with a map and a Sharpie. They proposed a solution, the Partition Plan. And if you think people were angry before, just wait until you see the map. Enter the United Nations. Freshly formed, full of hope, and completely unprepared for the headache they were about to inherit. In 1947, the UN formed a special committee, UNSCOP, to figure out what to do with Palestine. They looked at the demographics, they looked at the land ownership, and they came up with Resolution 181. The plan: split the land into two states. State A, Jewish state, gets about 56% of the land, mostly the Negev desert. State B, Arab state, gets about 44% of the land, mostly the highlands. And Jerusalem? Jerusalem would be an international zone, corpus separatum, owned by nobody, run by the UN. So, what do we think? Jewish leaders, it's not perfect. The borders are indefensible, and half of it is sand. But hey, it's a state. We'll take it. Arab leaders, wait. We make up 2/3 of the population, but we get less than half the land? And you're giving away our best fertile areas? Absolutely not. We reject this. The Arab leadership rejected the plan, calling it illegal and unfair. They argued the UN didn't have the right to give away their land. The Jewish leadership accepted it. The UN took a vote. The world watched. Vote result: 33 for, 13 against, 10 abstained. The resolution passed. The Jews danced in the streets. The Arabs declared a general strike. Fighting broke out immediately. It was a civil war. But this was just the appetizer. The main course was coming the moment the British packed their bags. May 14, 1948. The British mandate officially ends at midnight. Before the clock even strikes 12, David Ben-Gurion stands up in a museum in Tel Aviv and declares the establishment of the State of Israel. It was a moment of incredible joy for the Jewish people. After 2,000 years of exile and the horrors of the Holocaust, they had a home. But their neighbors didn't send a fruit basket. The next morning, literally the next morning, 5 Arab armies invaded. This wasn't a civil war anymore. This was the 1948 Arab to Israeli war. On paper, it looked like David versus Goliath. Tiny newborn Israel versus the whole neighborhood. But in reality, the Arab armies were uncoordinated, suspicious of each other, and poorly led. The Israelis were fighting for survival, unified, and surprisingly well organized. The fighting was brutal. Villages were destroyed. Massacres happened on both sides. But when the dust settled in 1949, the map had changed again. Israel didn't just survive, they won. And they took more land than the UN had originally given them. About 60% of the proposed Arab state was now Israel. But what about the Arab state? Did Palestine get independence? Nope. Jordan occupied the West Bank and East Jerusalem. Egypt occupied the Gaza Strip. There was no Palestine. Just lines on a map drawn by generals. And this brings us to the most painful part of the story. For Israelis, 1948 is the War of Independence. For Palestinians, it is known as the Nakba, the catastrophe. During the war, around 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes. Many fled fear of the fighting. Some were forced out at gunpoint by Israeli militias. They thought they would return when the war ended. But Israel, fearing a fifth column and wanting to maintain a Jewish majority, didn't let them back in. Their villages were destroyed or repopulated. Today, millions of their descendants still live in refugee camps in Lebanon, Jordan, Syria, the West Bank, and Gaza. Many still hold the keys to their grandparents' old houses. Houses that might not even exist anymore. This right of return is one of the biggest sticking points in the conflict today. So, 1948 ended with a Jewish state established, but at a massive human cost to the Palestinians. The conflict wasn't over, it was just frozen. And as we all know, nothing stays frozen in the desert for long. Because in 1967, things were about to go from complicated to insane. 1967. The vibe in the Middle East was tense. Egypt, Syria, and Jordan were massing troops on Israel's borders. Their rhetoric was, shall we say, unfriendly. Egypt, Nasser, we are ready to destroy you. Israel, sweating, they look pretty ready to destroy us. Israel, feeling cornered and terrified of another Holocaust, decided not to wait to be punched in the face. They decided to punch first. On the morning of June 5th, Israel launched a surprise air attack. Visual, animation of planes taking off, sound, whoosh. Within hours, almost the entire Egyptian Air Force was destroyed while it was still parked on the runway. Egypt, hey, where are my planes? Israel, holding a smoking wrench. What planes? What followed was one of the fastest military victories in history. In just 6 days, Israel defeated 3 Arab armies. But more importantly, they redrew the map. Drastically. Israel captured 1. The Golan Heights from Syria. 2. The Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip from Egypt. 3. And the big one, the West Bank and East Jerusalem from Jordan. Suddenly, Israel was in control of over 1 million Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza. This is the birth of the occupation. Israel argued, "We won this land in a defensive war. We'll hold it as a bargaining chip for peace." But then, something else happened. The settlers arrived. The settlements. Civilian Jewish communities built on land captured in 1967. To Palestinians and most of the world, including the UN, these are illegal under international law. To Israel, they are disputed territories, and Jews have a right to live in their ancestral homeland. Today, over 700,000 settlers live in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and the map looks like Swiss cheese. Fast forward through the 70s and 80s. We had the Yom Kippur War 1973, where the Arabs attacked by surprise, Israel almost lost, then won again. We had peace with Egypt, Israel gave back the Sinai. See, land for peace works. But the Palestinian issue? Still a mess. Until the 90s. The decade of flannel shirts, the Spice Girls, and hope? The Oslo Accords. For the first time, Israel recognized the PLO, Palestine Liberation Organization, as the representative of the Palestinians, and the PLO recognized Israel's right to exist. They shook hands. It was awkward, but it was historic. The plan: gradually transfer power to the newly formed Palestinian Authority. In 5 years, they would negotiate a final deal for a Palestinian state. Everything looked great. Peace was happening. And then, the extremists showed up. The buses started exploding in Tel Aviv. Fear returned. Then, on November 4, 1995, tragedy struck. Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, the architect of peace, was assassinated at a peace rally by a Jewish extremist. The peace process didn't die that night, but it was on life support. Trust evaporated. In 2000, the negotiations failed completely at Camp David. Clinton, come on guys, just sign the paper. Arafat, no, the deal isn't good enough. Barak, I offered you 90% of the West Bank. Arafat, I want 100% and East Jerusalem. The talks collapsed, and the Second Intifada began. This wasn't rocks and protests like the first one. This was suicide bombings, airstrikes, tanks in cities. Thousands died. Israel decided, if we can't make peace, we'll build a wall. Israel calls it the security fence, and argues it stopped the suicide bombings, which statistics say it did. Palestinians call it the apartheid wall, because it cuts deep into their land, separates farmers from fields, and restricts movement. And then a plot twist in 2005. Israel unilaterally pulled out of Gaza. Every soldier, every settler, gone. Instead, Hamas took over. In 2007, Hamas, a militant group dedicated to Israel's destruction, won elections and then violently kicked the Palestinian Authority out of Gaza. So now we have the current deadlock, the West Bank, ruled by the PA, moderate but corrupt, occupied by Israel, filled with settlements. Gaza, ruled by Hamas, blockaded by Israel and Egypt firing rockets. Israel, powerful, high-tech, but living in constant conflict. And that brings us to now. Welcome to the modern era, or as I like to call it, the cycle of doom. For the last 15+ years, the situation has been stuck in a deadly loop, particularly around Gaza. Here is the dynamic simplified. Step 1. Hamas fires rockets indiscriminately into Israeli cities. Hamas, we are resisting the blockade. Take that. Sound pew pew pew. Step 2. Israel responds with massive airstrikes. Israel, we have a right to defend ourselves. Sound boom. Step 3. The world watches on Twitter and screams at each other. Step 4. A ceasefire is signed. Step 5. Wait 2 years. Repeat. To deal with the rockets, Israel invented a real-life video game cheat code, the Iron Dome. The Iron Dome intercepts about 90% of incoming rockets. It saves countless Israeli lives. But it also changes the political calculus. Because Israelis feel safer, there is less pressure on the government to solve the root cause of the conflict. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority (PA) is still in charge technically, but they are weak, unpopular, and broke. And the settlements? They just keep growing. Imagine trying to build a state on a pizza where someone else keeps eating the toppings. That's the two-state solution right now. It is on life support, and the doctor is out to lunch. So, we've covered 3,000 years of history. We've seen empires rise and fall. We've seen promises broken. We've seen maps drawn by people who had never stepped foot in the desert. So, back to the original question, who actually owns the Holy Land? If you go by religion, God promised it to the Jews, but also to the Muslims and Christians, depending on which book you read. If you go by who was there first, the Jews have a solid claim dating back to antiquity. If you go by who has been living there for centuries, the Palestinians have an undeniable claim to their homes and villages. If you go by might makes right, Israel holds the power. The tragic truth is, two peoples claim the exact same tiny piece of land. And here is the punchline that isn't funny, both of them are right. The Jews have nowhere else to go. This is their only state. The Palestinians have nowhere else to go. This is their only home. Until they figure out how to share the keys, the history books will just keep adding more chapters of blood. But hey, maybe you have the solution? If you can solve the Middle East crisis in the comments section below, please do. The UN is eagerly waiting for your reply. If you want to understand why the rest of the world is also a mess, hit that subscribe button. See you next time.